guys and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be doing a favourites video. This feels very old school YouTube, feels very 2014 Zoella vibes, but basically I thought I'd talk you through everything that I have been watching, reading, listening to during lockdown and I've really enjoyed and I'd recommend to you guys too. I was originally going to talk through everything that I have watched or read, good and bad, but I thought, you know what, that video is actually going to be about 3 hours long, so I'm just gonna narrow it down to things I would actually recommend. Also, ignore my slightly dishevelled appearance. I sunburnt so badly yesterday. I'll insert a photo because I've got foundation on currently, so this top is also hiding some very burnt shoulders. I'll put timestamps down below in the description if you only want to know about books or you only want to know about Netflix shows, etc. Firstly, I'm going to start with books though. I've got 5 books that I want to talk to you guys about. They're all actually non-fiction books. I have been reading some fiction books, however these books I would recommend a lot more highly, and they are kind of all the same theme as well. Like, they have an underlying theme of self-help and like self-awareness. Anyway, just getting straight into it, the first book is How to Fail by Elizabeth Day. This is the first book that I read over lockdown and I really enjoyed it. So it's basically kind of like half autobiography, half self-help book. So each chapter is about failure in a different area of life, and I know that can seem quite pessimistic, but it's not. It's incredibly optimistic actually. So failure in terms of exams, failure in terms of relationships, friendships, sports. It's also inspired by her podcast, which is How to Fail by Elizabeth Day, and on that podcast she interviews guests who talk about their failures in life and basically how to overcome these failures and take the positives out of those situations. The next book is The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, I think that's how you say it. I always struggle to say that. But yeah, this is a practical guide to personal freedom, a Toltec wisdom book. So the 4 agreements that this book talks about is always be impeccable with your word, don't make assumptions, don't take things personally, and always do your best. It's a really simple and easy book to read, but the messages that it has in it are so powerful and it really makes you think and evaluate your life, especially surrounding these 4 areas, a lot. So yeah, I'd really recommend this one. It's really quick to read as well. I think it's literally like less than 200 pages. The next book is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rennie Edo-Lodge. I don't want to speak too much about this because I have mentioned it in a few videos now, and I've also done a whole video over on the StudyTube Project channel about it, but I would 100% recommend this book. It's written from a British perspective and it starts with, you know, the history of race and racism in Britain, and then it talks about white privilege, it talks about systemic racism, institutional racism, intersectionality between race and gender, race and class. Pretty much covers most areas surrounding race and racism, so I'd really recommend this book, especially if you are trying to educate yourself in light of recent events. The next book is Good Vibes, Good Life by Vex King, and I have just finished this and it is incredible. It says how self-love is the key to unlocking your greatness, and that pretty much summarizes the book. The book is all about self-love and reevaluating your attitude and your mindset and your energy. He also explains the concepts of the law of attraction and the law of vibration really well as well, so it's quite an educational book. Like, you learn a lot from it. I also really like the way that this book is structured because it's got 7 parts to it, and each of those parts are broken down into, I don't know if you call them chapters or segments, but they're basically broken down into really small parts, and it just means it's so much easier to understand and digest and actually get the message out of it, and each part builds on the part before, so by the end of the book you literally feel as though you've had some sort of epiphany, and it really changed my mindset on a lot of things. The last book that I wanted to talk about is kind of an honorary mention because I haven't really finished it yet. I'm only about 3 chapters in. However, I really wanted to mention it in this video because I know that the majority of my audience is female, and I'd really recommend that every female, and to be fair men as well, read this book because it's so empowering. Florence Given is one of my absolute favourite feminists, and she's also an artist as well, and you can tell because this book is stunning. It's got so many amazing illustrations in it, and it's just beautiful, and I'm very excited to finish this. Okay, now on to Netflix shows. I don't really watch that many films, to be honest. I realised this when writing this list out. I was like, I think I've literally watched about 3 films over lockdown, and I wouldn't really recommend any of them, but I do watch a lot of series and a lot of documentaries, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to try and not give too much away. I really don't know how to talk about these shows without giving away the plot line, so I'm sorry if these are like the most vague descriptions ever, but just know that I recommend them, so just go and watch them yourself. The first is a 4-part mini-series called Unorthodox, and I found this series so interesting because it follows the story of a Jewish woman who basically escapes her unhappy marriage in New York and flees to Berlin where her mum lives, but her husband and another guy from their community are sent by the rabbi to try and get her back to New York. And I thought this was so interesting because, I don't know, you learn a lot about the culture as well of this community, and I also really like the fact that it's only a 4-part series because it didn't feel as though anything was dragged out, you know, it was very like straight to the point. The next series is one called Hollywood, and as the name suggests, it's about Hollywood. However, it's about Hollywood post World War II in its supposed golden age, and it follows the story of a group of aspiring writers, actors, filmmakers who are all trying to get famous and basically make it in Hollywood. For some reason, I found this show incredibly emotional. I'm not really sure why, because I think it's supposed to be more of a comedy, but I was literally crying my eyes out at so many points during this series, and yeah, I just think it's a fab story, to be honest. The only thing is that it is an interesting blend between kind of factual and fiction at the same time, and it deals with a lot of issues that I feel as though they could have delved in deeper to. It has a very utopian view on some things, and I feel like that is something they could have explored a bit further. However, I think it is supposed to be a comedy, so that's probably why they skim over them a bit more. The next series is one called Atypical, and this follows the life and story of a boy called Sam Gardner who's 18 and he has autism, and it basically follows his kind of like experience of being a teenager and going through everything that you go through as an 18-year-old but with autism, and it's so interesting. It offers such an interesting insight and perspective on it, and I got so emotionally invested in this series. Basically, the underlying theme here is that I just get attached and get emotional to series and characters too easily. But I don't know, it was just such a great series. Like, the actual plotline of it is quite simplistic, but at the same time it's so interesting. The next series is called White Lines, and this is probably one of my favourite series that I've watched during lockdown because I don't think I've watched many other things like this. Like, it was quite unique, or maybe I just haven't seen anything like it personally. But it's basically about a guy called Axel who travels to Ibiza to become a famous DJ. However, he disappears, and then 20 years later his body is found, and his sister Zoe flies out to Ibiza to try and investigate his death and find out what happens. The last series that I want to talk about is what I'm watching currently, and I think I've got a few episodes left, but I'm very nearly done, and it is Dear White People. And Dear White People basically follows the story of a group of black students at a mostly white elite university in America. It's fictional, but I think it does a great job of social commentary, particularly focusing on issues of race and racism in modern America. I really like the structure of this series as well because each episode focuses on a different character, which really mixes it up a bit, because it means even though it's still following the same storyline throughout, you see a different perspective and a different kind of like mindset every episode. I'm not gonna lie, I think it personally does go downhill a bit in season 3. I feel like they just dragged it out a bit too long, but the first 2 seasons are amazing. All of those shows were on Netflix. However, I've literally just remembered another series that I wanted to talk about that's on BBC iPlayer called Normal People. I feel like by now most people have watched this series, but if you haven't, I would really recommend it. It is so emotional and raw, and it basically follows a story of a boy and a girl who meet during sixth form and then transition to university, and their relationship, their friendship, and it deals with a lot of other issues outside of that to do with like family and friends. Okay, now on to documentaries. The first documentary that I wanted to speak about is the Jeffrey Epstein documentary, and there's not really a lot I can say about this because, I don't know, it's kind of what it says in the title. It's a documentary about Jeffrey Epstein, but even though it's really hard to watch actually, it's so interesting. The next documentary is a 4-part documentary called When They See Us, and this is all about the 1989 Central Park jogger case and the story of how 5 black males were falsely accused of a crime that they didn't commit, and they all got put in either juvenile centres or prison. This was so emotional and hard to watch. I spoke about this in a vlog a while back, but it's so interesting and definitely worthwhile watching because it reveals a lot about systemic racism in the US, and yeah, it's very topical at the moment, obviously, with kind of like police brutality and false accusations and incarceration. Along the same lines, I also wanted to recommend 13th, which is a documentary all about the US prison system and mass incarceration, and the documentary basically shows the history of it. It goes through the history from slavery till now, and I found this documentary so interesting because I've never really researched prisons that much and therefore didn't realise that they operate as normal businesses operate. You know, they are completely focused on profit, and this is often at the expense of black people who are disproportionately convicted of crimes and incarcerated. And the last documentary I wanted to recommend is Circus of Books, and this is about a couple who during the 1980s owned a gay bookstore and how their bookstore became kind of like the central haven of gay culture in Hollywood at the time. Finally, I've got 3 podcasts that I definitely recommend as well. So the first podcast is The Girls' Bathroom by Sophia and Cinzia. I love their podcast so much. I feel like it's just so light-hearted and fun to listen to, and they basically do alternate episodes of boy talk and girl talk. So boy talk is all about boy-related issues and girl talk is all around girl-related issues. People basically send in dilemmas and Sophia and Cinzia attempt to solve them. I'm gonna say attempt because I don't always agree with their advice. I don't think it's always the best, but it's just such a funny thing to listen to. The next podcast that I'd recommend is Mindful in Minutes by Kelly Smith, and this podcast is basically guided meditations, and I haven't done loads of these. It's not something I listen to on the regular. However, if I do want to meditate, then sometimes I will use her podcast. I especially really like her chakra podcast. She does meditations for different chakras. And lastly, the last podcast is About Race by Renee Edo-Lodge, and this is kind of a continuation of her book. It builds on the topics that she speaks about in her book. However, it's more to do with recent racial history and current politics. She interviews a lot of anti-racist activists on there as well, which is so interesting. People such as feminists, people in the media, politicians as well, and it's just a really interesting and educational thing to listen to. So yeah, those are all my recommendations and things that I have been enjoying during lockdown. Let me know if you'd like a part 2 of this, maybe in a month or so, because obviously I'm going to continue watching things and continue reading things because I've got so much free time, so I haven't really been doing a lot else. So yeah, let me know if you'd be interested in that, and if you have enjoyed this video then make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and also follow my social media, which will be linked down below in the description. Bye guys!